Okay, so this is Amy,
And Melissa with laryngitis.
and we're the Dyslexia
Dyslexia
Duo.
duo.
So we're here today and all our guests are wonderful and special. But when I found out that this particular guest was willing to come on our podcast, I about fell on the floor. So I'm going to leave it open to our special guest to introduce herself and tell everybody a little bit about herself.
Well, I guess this makes it a trio instead of a duo
That's
today.
right.
And it is a joy to be with Amy and Melissa. My name is Maryanne Wolf. I am an advocate for children. More than anything else, my whole life is spent about how we can introduce children to the world of not language, which they come to us with, but written language. And so I have studied the reading brain for many years and have written quite a few books. I'll say two of them, Proust and the Squid, The Story and Science of the Reading Brain, and most recently, or more recently, The Reading Brain in a Digital World, which the title for it is Reader Come Home. And so today I'm with Melissa without a voice and Amy with a voice to speak about how my work on reading, the reading brain, from the standpoint of cognitive neuroscience and linguistics, has so much to offer our teachers in the classroom. And so my work at UCLA as the director of the Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice is about how we can take that knowledge base and bring it to life in the classroom.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So let's talk a little bit about, let's talk a little bit more. So what got you interested in becoming a cognitive neuroscientist? What drove your interest in that?
Well, Amy, it's a story of teaching. I always knew from the time I was a young child when we had a club that I was, well, let's say titularly the secretary of, and our motto was to educate education. I still can't believe that, a 7, 8-year-old would have, I mean, really, there's a great word, chutzpah. That, how I had the chutzpah to have this ambition. But the reality was it was all about teaching what I could teach. And in the beginning, it was English literature. I have 2 degrees in English literature and thought that that would be my PhD. I would teach in a college and that would be my life. The reality is that I became a different kind of teacher because of a life that I also had, which was how can we be truly releasing the potential of people who were in environments where that was not possible. And so I joined a Peace Corps-like teaching group that sent me to Hawaii, rural Hawaii, where there was almost no roads at that time where I was. And most of the children lived in families indentured to plantations.
Mm.
And that's when I discovered that for me, the understanding of literacy, the understanding that would help me teach the children I was failing to teach in that Peace Corps setting would have to be the change in my life. And so I ended up at Harvard Reading Lab studying how in the world the brain learns to read. It was my insight then and throughout my life that the more we learn about how the brain develops reading, the better we can teach. And so that experience of becoming a failing teacher, I failed to teach all those children. I loved them. They loved me. I will never forget. I still know their names when I can't even remember some of my neighbors' names. I still know them. And that experience changed me into basically a cognitive neuroscientist. And the thing about cognitive means that we are studying how the brain actually uses different cognitive processes, thought processes, language processes. And so it's not a bench scientist where we're studying cells, but we do study what are the areas in the brain that make a circuit. And that's what I'm really, if you will, using more than anything else, how our understanding of a circuit in the brain, which connects other circuits, helps teachers understand what they have to teach. So I'm going to anticipate one of your questions that will come at the end, which is, well, how do you do that?
Right.
I'll just say that became the basis for my research in intervention, which ultimately became the RAVO program. At the end of this program, we'll talk about, but it all is part of the story, if you will, of how I wanted to teach children who were failing or struggling for whatever reason. Some were poor, some were multilingual, some were dyslexic, but I didn't know any of that. And
Mhm.
in a way, that's the way many of our young teachers come to their first, second, and third grade classrooms. They don't know any of that information. So it's my job to help teach them.
Wow, that's wonderful. And you're just very inspiring, just with your background and then the drive as to why you did all that. It's just inspiring.
That leads me to kind of our next question, our next topic. I believe that you, me, Amy, a lot of the teachers out there in the United States and elsewhere, we believe that reading is a human right. That's why
Mm,
we're so passionate about it. And we know that you believe that. So,
mhm.
what do you feel like that means to you personally?
Good question, Melissa, and one that I think about because each of us uh, has an ordinary life, and that ordinary life has meaning that we constantly have to look at. We want to love our family, our friends, for me, my spiritual life, but how do we love and put that love in the context of our work? So for me, from the start of my epiphany in Hawaii, I realized that if I don't teach these children to read and become literate, they may well replicate their parents' I don't want to say impoverished lives, but impoverished conditions in which they were indentured to basically large plantations. That is a metaphor for me to say that I hope that all of us can contribute to releasing the potential of every child. And literacy within that context is the vehicle for doing it better than almost any other skill that humanity has invented. And so for me, teaching teachers how best to release the potential it should be considered a basic human right around the world, around our backyard, around our city, our state, our country, and our place in multiple countries. Part of my work was in Africa 10 years ago because we were trying to figure out how um, some of our work might help children who had no school, no running water, no electricity, who lived off the grid. And so part of that basic human right philosophy stems also from working in places where there is no teacher, there is no teaching method. Rather, there is a desire to see what one can do with what's available to release their potential. So it's a little tiny statement in a big context.
I also think, to me, what I think about that too is that sometimes people take for granted the ability to read easily.
Yes.
And so it comes easily to some people, and some other people, it doesn't come easily. Obviously, we know those people. So I think it can be easy for people to take that for granted and not be able to put themselves in other people's shoes, that it is a harder skill to acquire for some people.
It is actually harder than most people realize for most people. There
Mm.
are outliers. There are outliers. But Melissa and Amy and I are all dedicated to those who struggle most. If not, the audience can't see me, maybe we'll take a picture of the painting behind me. But it's one of the several paintings I have from an LA dyslexic artist who happens to be my son.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
I know firsthand the experience of being not just a researcher in dyslexia, but a mother. And that has been an enormously important part of my advocacy. But I was studying dyslexia before my son was ever born, because one of the amazing things about being in cognitive neuroscience is that you study both typical and atypical development, and you learn from both. And so I learned way before Ben was born that studying dyslexia was going to help me help teachers teach all children, because the more you know about dyslexia, the more you know about how to teach any child. So dyslexia is a really important phenomenon. It's basically a different organization of the human brain that advantages some areas like art and architecture, entrepreneurship, but it is not a brain that was organized to learn written language, which requires these, as I said, these wonderful circuits that just weren't there. So the fact is, reading is complex. It is beautiful, but it is never to be taken for granted by any child. Bravo to the outliers who seem to learn it naturally. There is nothing natural about learning to read. It's an invention that requires a new circuitry in the brain.
And it's not something that the brains have evolved into, because we hear about not reading, listening and speaking is natural,
That's
but
right.
reading and writing has to be explicitly taught. And the brains have not evolved to the point where you can't not teach it. It has to be explicitly taught in order to learn it.
That's one of the harder aspects of our society. We were we were not sure how to teach reading. We haven't been sure how to teach reading for 3 centuries. The French elite used basically a phonics-like method, whereas the bourgeoisie, the rest of us were given the Bible, and it was hoped that we would induce. They didn't use those terms. But then in the 20th century, there became, I would say, the romance of a great but incorrect idea. And that is that children, given the best kinds of literature, would automatically learn, or not automatically, but they would over time induce the alphabetic principle. Now, it is the case that I would say a fair number of our children can over time do that, but they are much more easily learning if they are explicitly taught. But a huge number of children need to be explicitly taught. Every struggling reader needs explicit instruction. And that's part of actually what Melissa said, that people really think, oh, they take it for granted. Anybody can do it. You can talk, so you can read. And Amy, you put your finger right on the assumption that is guiding incorrect methods. The assumption is that it's taken for granted. Anybody can induce it, and you don't need to teach it. They'll learn it. You just put them in that environment. That is such a shame, because the people who are teaching that way have wonderful insights into literature, into language, and that should never be lost. So I always invite, like I did a teachers college not PowerPoint keynote for teaching the science in an expanded way, so they know to be explicit is not to dull the senses or the imagination, rather to release them through knowledge. So explicit teaching is one of the most important certainties about how to teach most of our children, but almost all of our struggling readers. There's always exceptions to everything I say. And so, I never want to say something that I have to eat immediately afterwards, but I'm pretty safe on this one, that I only have to eat a few words when we have so much evidence that explicit and systematic teaching is best for most children. And that does not, and it's not an and or a but or a yet, it's an and. The expertise of our whole language and balanced literacy teachers is not just welcome, it's wonderful, as long as it's in conjunction with
Right.
explicit teaching of these parts of the reading brain, whether we call it phoneme awareness or semantics or orthography. Basically, we need an understanding of how to teach and learn the alphabetic principle and what contributes to it and fluency and connects to authentic literature or inauthentic literature. I write a lot of decodable stories. Some people, despite my 2 degrees in English, may call that inauthentic. I call it story.
Yeah. Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked about the science of reading, and of course, this report is now from 2000, the National Reading Panel report talked about the big 5, the 5 pillars of reading, and a lot of dyslexia curricula utilize this data, and some don't. They should. But how can teachers supplement these areas? Maybe it's missing a fluency piece. What can they do to support fluency within a particular curriculum, dyslexia or not?
Yeah, it's a perfect expression, dyslexia or not. These are the same principles. The brain is the brain. And a fluent brain, whether it's a dyslexic fluent brain or a typical fluent brain, needs the contributions from many parts of that brain. And it's completely connected, Amy, to what I call an expanded understanding of the science of reading, an expanded understanding of foundational skills, an expanded understanding of fluency. Now, in the National Reading Panel, they included fluency, and they made a comment that was absolutely apt for that moment in time, which is 25 years ago or 24.
Yeah.
But they said, the only thing we have is repeated reading, but we know basically that more research has to be done. Well, unfortunately, so many people believe fluency can be changed by 2 things: by working on prosody, the melodic contour of reading, so that you have phrasing and all the things that make meaning more obvious when the human voice reads whatever they're reading the text, and do what is called repeated reading, read it over and over again. Now, the problem is that is very nice, but it's insufficient. It's like, goodness gracious, you give a piece of what's necessary and you think, oh, well, that helps, but it doesn't help sufficiently for the child to become so automatic that they can allocate attention to stories, to text. So my work on the reading brain is really about looking at all the things that contribute to a fluent, comprehending, reading student, reader, whatever. It has to have all of the things that what other people might have called uh, not just, they might call them oral language processes, and they are that, but I call them expanded foundational skills. Now, let me be very specific, because this brings us to what I I laughingly years ago called Possum, just to make sure everyone knows that there are these multiple contributions to foundational skills, and that the foundational skills in their entirety contribute to fluency, not repeated reading by itself, not prosody by itself. So Possum stands for a P, which stands for phonology, phoneme awareness, phonics, and prosody. All those are good things in the P. The O is orthographic processes, and P and O are basically the letter sound correspondence rules in the alphabetic principle. So the P and the O. So most people know that contributes. That what I also said was that these oral language processes that some people call oral, and I say they're oral and written processes. They're used in both. And that's the SS, which is semantics, syntax, and U is the conceptual understanding of that alphabetic principle and the conceptual or cognitive aspects of understanding text. So the P has multiple aspects, the U has multiple aspects, but basically I want people to understand that that syntax, knowing how words work in sentences, is not just an oral language process, but a written language process that needs explicit teaching. Now, the semantics in the reading panel always included vocabulary, but from a cognitive neuroscience viewpoint, that is a lovely little word that is obfuscating a huge semantic development that the brain has, because words are connected to each other in multiple ways. They're connected by meaning, they're connected by form, they're connected by sound. So when you work on semantic development, you really are working way beyond learning, 10 or 20 words a week. No, you are working on understanding that a word can have multiple meanings, that's polysemy, that a word is connected in context to a sort of a neighborhood, a semantic neighborhood of words, that words can be connected by just the sounds they make. So all of these things are in semantic development. And that's part of a foundational skill that, if known, makes decoding faster. So the more you know about what it means, how it works in a sentence, understanding that these words work this way in text, and finally the M, morphology, morphemes, one of my favorite things that people make fun of. They now give me little people at Mount St. Joseph gave me a little sticker that says morphemes are sexy. Well, okay. I think so. More power to anyone who will wear that sticker. But I just want to say that morphemes are one of the secret sauces of fluency. So together, all of those, phonology, orthography, semantics, syntax, understanding, and morphology, they contribute to fluency. And fluency is the bridge to true comprehension. So that's a long way of saying that the science of reading, when we just talk only about foundational skills, expands our understanding of decoding as contributed, fluency as contributed, and both of them as they contribute to comprehension. So this is way beyond what often narrowly goes into people's mind when they think about science of reading. Their first and sometimes only association is the phonology and phoneme awareness research that we have done now for 40 years and has been, it's 50 years by now. Really, it began in the early 70s. And that is just great. We have really done a great job of teaching the alphabetic principle by our emphasis on understanding how important the connection between letter and sound, that those connections are so important. And so working on what we call phonemes, but some of you may know Mark Seidenberg's work, and he talks about phonemes as being as being abstract, and they are. But what I would just emphasize is they are our abstract representation of sounds that we need to connect conceptually and linguistically and orthographically to letters. So that's where it gets a little tricky. And I don't want to go into the linguistic weeds there, but that he's making an important point, because it also translates into, don't just do a checklist and say, oh, I'm working on phonemes today, and you work on da 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 da. That is not the way. You are working to connect sounds that represent an abstract phoneme with letters, which are their own form of visual abstraction. So you're really, this is conceptually tougher than people realize, but you don't get there by just isolating phonemes, but you don't get there by ignoring them either. And so for me, the usefulness of our research is showing us how important they are in making that connection for children. But if you will, the downside is that some people then just have isolated phonemes. Now, that brings me to one last final point, and that is that when we talk about our kids, and here you are in Texas and I'm in California, and so many of our children are multilingual, and we have different orthographies in languages, and we have different phonemes. So we do have to acknowledge that a large of our California and Texan children come with not all of those English phonemes there, and they have an orthography with 19 letters, and we have 26. So depending on whether they learn to read and in that second or third language, and those differences, that's when the emphasis on phonemes and letter are especially important, so that the phonemes that were not part of their first language are able to be part of the teaching. And Claude Goldenberg has some beautiful work on this. Elsa Carden. Well, there's so many really great people out there who are doing this work.
Thank you so much. My goodness.
So
Go ahead.
you had mentioned that dyslexia is still a grossly misunderstood phenomenon.
Yeah.
And even with all the information from all the wonderful researchers like yourself, like Dr. Hasbrook, Dr. Gabb, Dr.
Yes.
Motes, for example,
Yes.
why do you think it's still so misunderstood, and what could we do differently to help
It's such a
us?
good question, Melissa. And I think to take a positive view, I use my own son as an example. He never, ever wanted to be called dyslexic until he was in high school, and ultimately in college. He went to Rhode Island School of Design, where he realized he's not the only one who can't do what others do easily. And he was surrounded by people like himself who had all these great advantages in things like visual, the ability to take the visual image and to make art, architecture, or to make patterns. A lot of entrepreneurs see their problems and they do amazing problem solving because they can visualize things that the rest of us do not do. So it took him a long time, and then he realized that to be dyslexic was cool. And so I saw in the transition from the onus that the teachers placed on kids who were doing something differently and not doing what they told them to do, that has changed immensely. We now, of course, have much better and much more knowledge that the average teacher has, the special education teacher has. But still, if you look at some of the facts on the ground, if someone had and there are data showing that our special ed teacher has much less knowledge than you would think about literacy and dyslexia than a literacy specialist. And that should not be. The special ed person has in these data has 57%, makes about 57% on these tests of literacy, whereas the literacy would be in the 70%, which still isn't enough, by the way. But the reality is that means our schools of education need a lot more work on how do we teach all children, which means how do we teach struggling readers, which means how do we teach children with dyslexia, individuals. So we're still not there, but we are better than we were. And there's so many, if you will, celebrities, including are people of celebrity status, including my own governor. Gavin Newsom is dyslexic and wrote a book for a children's book on dyslexia. And so we have many of our entrepreneurs. One study by Julie Logan done a long time ago in England and the United States showed that about a third of our entrepreneurs have a history of dyslexia, a third of our most successful ones. And so, and you look at Silicon Valley and Hewlett, I mean, you look at all of these people who have a history of dyslexia. We look in the investment world, entrepreneurship, like Charles Schwab, who has not only a history of dyslexia, a history of philanthropy and dyslexia, which is very, very important. So, and then there are places that have made the link between creativity and dyslexia much more visible, whether at Yale or in, oh my goodness, there's so many amazing people who have looked at what are the advantages, and there a lot of them are filmmakers. Oh my God. I won't use Harvey in this, but some of you know when I say
I know
Harvey,
Harvey.
you
Yeah,
know.
he was at IDA. Yeah.
Did you meet him?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
I chased him down for a while trying to talk to him.
Oh, good. But you have these filmmakers who are just wonderful, who and then you have people who are doing good podcasts like yours that spread the word. So we have, we have much more of a presence as an area of not just education, but celebration of people who are dyslexic. And, you look at the history of art and my gosh, look at Rodin, for heaven's sakes. And there's even some hints of Picasso. Oh my gosh, I don't even want to go in that line, but because my son, Ben Wolf Nolan, once told me, Mom, and this is in Barcelona, where Gaudi has all these amazing sculptures, and not sculptures, architectures, and all these amazing colors. And I said, he has to be dyslexic. And Ben said, Mom, not every artist is dyslexic. But just for the record, Melissa and Amy, I then went to biographies of Gaudi and found out he had a very hard time inexplicably at school since he was so smart. Duh.
Yeah.
It was just undiagnosed because we didn't, they basically in that period of time didn't know what it was.
Right, right,
So,
right.
I mean, they called it Wortblindheit in Germany, word blindness.
Mhm.
And no one, in Barcelona would have called Gaudi word blind, the most visually gifted person in the city. So, but anyway, all to say, dyslexia's image in the world has changed, but insufficiently in the schools of education, where teaching our new teachers about how to teach all children and struggling readers and dyslexic readers is still way behind. Now, I'm going to do something. I know we're going to do a screenshot later. I'm going to give modules on dyslexia, 7 modules that we now give teachers in our schools of education in California. And I did this for Comer Yates at Atlanta Speech School. He's going to put it on the Cox campus website, these
Nice.
modules. But I will give something for your audience when we do a share screen so that
Yeah,
we can give them a QR code
absolutely. That
for
would
these
be
That'd be
modules.
wonderful.
wonderful. That
Yeah,
would be
for sure.
wonderful. I do have a question, and it was on our list of questions, but I'm kind of going a little off at the same time. I've noticed, and I'm retired from public ed now, but a lot of our districts are going to digital copies of textbooks, digital copies of
Yeah.
books.
Yeah.
And I know personally, I
Mhm.
have a hard time reading a digital copy. There's something about a book and
Mm.
be able to see the pages and the length, how long the page is, and being able to take in that whole page. And I don't know, it feels different when it's digital. Is that an, is that
You're
impacting our
absolutely correct.
students?
No,
Okay,
Amy, it is unfortunate, but people do not, to this moment, have sufficient research to prove exactly what you say. But we have some research. And basically, that research is showing that and when I say some research, we actually have some huge meta-analyses that show that if you give the same little story in print and digital, now the amount of people who are in these studies, this is called a meta-analysis. This was done in Europe. 171,000 subjects from the last basically 2 decades of studies on this. And that was the only thing. You just read it in both medium and then you answer comprehension questions. The ability to remember detail, to know detail in the plot was so much better in the print format. Now, the question that I had and they answered was, what about the last parts of the sample in which the digital natives were really the participants? So not the 2000 to 2010, but let's say the 2014 on. Those would be digital natives. What were they like? The surprising answer was they were even better in print than their
oh,
cohort. Why? Because when asked what they thought they were better at, they said, well, we're better at the screen because we're faster, not realizing that that is basically skimming and
yeah.
having less relationship to the deep, what I call the deep reading processes under comprehension that take more time. So the data now have gotten much, much more advanced by this group is actually in Barcelona of all things. I just
Of
talked
all
about
things.
Barcelona. And Salmaran Delgado and Mangan from Norway. There's all kinds of people doing all of this work. Naomi Barron from American University here in this country, and myself, Reader Come Home, really summarized that data till but in some ways I need to write a new book, which, God forbid.
When you have the time, right?
But God forbid that I say that out loud, but I do have to do something to help people realize this is a much bigger problem. I testify or write or do interviews now in Europe, especially more recently in Norway and in Denmark. Also, Korea is doing it, and I'm trying to tell them the same thing. Don't digitize those
Yeah.
children's books. Do not do that. The amount of digital exposure, this is a new study it's called the Singapore study. The amount of digital exposure between 0 and 8 is correlated. Now, I'm going to say correlated, and that is not necessarily cause, correlated with poorer attention and academic performance. JAMA, our Journal of American Medicine, found that that's even for 0 to 1, that the kids, it's not academic performance, but on language, is the more digital exposure, the less, if you will, enriched those language areas are. And a
Wow.
1-year-old. So we have
Wow.
data from 0 to 1, 0 to 8. We now have the college age, young adults. Now, we don't have these pure, this is causal. What we have are these terrible threats that correlations nevertheless point us to. And I'm telling Korea, who was, I mean, an absolutely amazing country for its educational achievement, I'm just telling them, don't follow Sweden, which digitized all their kids and then found the academic performance going down. And so then had to reverse. Now, Norway, which always has a kind of a competition with kind of a football game type competition, they wanted me to testify so that they really didn't follow Sweden's example. Same thing going on in Denmark. Now, the fact is digital technocracy overwhelms everything in our lives right now.
Yeah.
But people don't realize that it is a different experience. And part of that experience has to do with comprehension monitoring.
Yeah.
And that's where, Amy, your experience actually has multi-sensory aspects. You can, without realizing it, the haptic, the feel, the kinesthetic makes it real.
Yeah.
There's a smell to it. If you're if you're a 3-year-old, you can eat it. But, all of these are actually sensory aspects that are there, but they're connected to cognitive aspects because there's spatial memory that you have when you see it in a book. And you kind of know, well, oh, gee, that must be in the first third of the book. If I remember, it's like left side, low, close to the bottom. And
Yes.
you have more spatial memory than you ever realize. But you also have spatial memory at a micro level. When you are reading, you actually are, it's with a book, you're able to go back and check yourself. This is called comprehension monitoring. And you can do that on the screen, but by and large, it's too much work. And so you don't. So the screen is the hasten us along mode, and the book invites us to think more while we read.
Okay. That's, I was
Fascinating.
trying to explain that to another teacher, and she's like, why wouldn't you want a digital book? You can click on the word, it can explain it, you can highlight it, you can look. And I'm like, yeah, no, I use all that stuff, and I appreciate that when I need a book immediately, I can just probably download a copy. But I don't feel like a good reader, even with
don't
all those
immerse.
tools. Yeah.
You are not, and the real word for a lot of people that helps trigger their understanding, reading a book is a more immersive experience. Now, I'm explaining immersive cognitively, sensorially, basically intellectually. But the reality is you are feeling a lot more, you are thinking a lot more because you have more time to allocate when you have a book.
Okay, good. Thank you for
That's
that. Thank you so
fascinating.
much.
So you had mentioned in that discussion about deep reading. So
Mhm.
what is deep reading? Can you explain that a little bit more and
Sure.
how teachers can develop that in their students?
Yeah, basically it's a panoply of processes that begin with what do we know? And so the deep reader is pulling together almost immediately a matching game between what they know and what the text is telling them. And let's just call that background knowledge. From that, they make inferences. Is this something I don't know? Is this something that really is? So they are moving from analogical skills to inferential skills. Well, inference is actually part of analogy, but it's looking at these matches between what that person's knowledge base is and what is being given to them in this text. And it could be fiction, it could be nonfiction, but nonfiction is quick and easy to understand in terms of background knowledge, but fiction is really a beautiful way. I don't know people like this. What in the world? Who are they? So we're actually trying on people's thoughts and feelings we never had, which is part and parcel, not just of background knowledge, but of empathy, passing over. Very, very important. In Ravo, the new E is empathy.
Oh, wow.
We really want to have people understand how important it is to take on the perspective of others. And in this climate in our country, when so many people are polarized and think that whole swaths of people are other instead of others,
Right.
we really are. You remember the King and I, we've got to be carefully taught, that one song. Well, I take that in a different way. We've got to be carefully taught to have empathy for other people's perspectives. And so I'm really, really emphasizing how important empathy is as a deep reading process. And the one that needs perhaps equal, if not more weight, is critical thinking. You have to have time to evaluate truth. And kids today are the most susceptible victims of misinformation and
Yeah.
disinformation. And
Absolutely.
we really have social media. Blaming does nothing. Rather, understanding that social media can have a useful role and a threatening role is important. But it really can be very destructive when people accept rather than analyze critically what is being said.
Yeah.
In all our different media. And finally, I guess the ultimate deep reading process is insights from that person, their own deep reading self. The heart of reading is always to think for yourself, which we actually embody in a little character called T-Lex, which I'll show you.
Yes, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I really want people to understand you can teach critical thinking from the start of reading. It's a really important message I want to get to everyone. Critical thinking and empathy begin from the start.
Well, and I wanted to kind of bridge back to our conversation about the digital world, because I think this is kind of intertwining, at least in my brain.
Yeah.
You had mentioned this deep thinking and the empathy, but with the development of AI
Yeah.
and how you could just tell the AI what you want to, a general idea of what you want to say, and then it spits out this whole long
Yeah.
diatribe of
Yeah.
what it knows. Do you think we're eventually going to kind of unteach ourselves how to think or how to have that empathy, or kind of?
Ooh, interesting.
Oh, I'm right with you, Melissa. I had a podcast for an NPR program of Colin McEnroe, and I said, my worry is that we're going to develop cerebral wall-E's, that, we farm everything out like Wall-E did,
Yes, yes,
that's what he did. And he became obese and unable to do a thing when basically AI took over.
yes,
And there's that. And then there's the worry I have that actually wasn't Wall-E, but pre-Wall-E, and that is, if we don't teach our children how to think and write and go through the arduous, and it is laborious, it is work, but that's creating some of those connections and circuits that enables that brain to analyze what's being spit out. How will they ever really know what's true? And
right,
I mean, we are farming out for people who already have formed brain circuits. But what if we're doing this for our young who haven't formed that? It's bad enough for us. It's much worse if they never formed those difficult ways of translating thought into language, into written language. That helps reading and understanding. It helps writing. It helps thinking. So Melissa, you added one other thing. It helps feeling. It helps empathy. And so I really, I have to say, I hadn't ever included that when I talk about this, and I appreciate your insight.
Well, thank you. That means a lot.
That's a
That means a
lot. That's
lot, a
awesome.
lot.
So, Dr. Wolf, can you show us a little bit about Ravo?
Oh, yeah, let me get a
There.
share screen on here.
Okay,
And let me put this share up.
there we go.
Let's see. Now let's see if I can get this. This is, my computer is having a very hard time. Let's see, screen sharing. Let me see, it's not working. Can you see it?
I see a strip of editing tools.
Yeah, and that's all, that's okay. Let's see if I can do one other thing. Yeah, Mike, I had to go in, let's see now if I can try. Do you see anything now?
No, it's just ghosted out now.
Okay, let me see. It says I'm screen sharing, and then let's see if I can. Let's try one more time. Let's do a share.
There it is.
Oh, you
There it
see it?
is. Yeah, we see it. It's
Oh,
partial. Yeah,
wonderful.
we just
Oh,
need
I'm
to
so
stretch it
happy.
out. Yeah, we need to make it a slideshow, I guess, or
Okay,
click on
now
the
we're going to do
slide.
the slideshow,
Yeah,
and let's do that.
yeah, there we go.
Okay, and now what I'm going to do is, unfortunately, it blocked my ability to do this fast, so I'm going to do it myself fast. Well, actually, I can show people Possum.
Yeah,
Duh.
let's see it. Let's see it.
Do you see Possum now?
Yeah,
You should take a picture of Possum,
I am going to take a picture of Possum. Okay,
because that's the essence of Ravo is Possum.
I love it.
And if you see this, Possum in Latin means to enable.
Oh.
So it's not just a marsupial. And then we're okay, and then what I wanted to show people is that basically Ravo is part of our NICHD randomized controlled treatment studies. And what we did was we reversed engineered the reading brain. So you see Possum in the circuitry right there, if you see it. And then what we changed, if you will, that intellectual or cognitive appreciation of Ravo from the standpoint of reverse engineering the brain into strategies. So we have one, if you will, character for each part of the reading brain. And let's just say I'll do one for, so here's Mayor Mick. He's teaching the connections, the semantic connections. So he's our semantic neighborhood. He's the mayor of Ravo Town. He is so interested in helping people understand the connections among words. But one part of semantic network theory, or how kids learn, is the word polysemy, which I used before, which means that a word can have many interesting meanings. So we have a character for that named Ms. Mim, and Mim stands for many interesting meanings. So both of these are characters that are teaching metacognitive strategies about semantics. And then we have Korean basketball teenagers playing Jam Slam are their names, and they are teaching us blending. They're basically synthetic phonics teachers using basketball as a metaphor. And then we have characters for every part of speech, Nina, noun, etc. And then we have basically my favorite new character, T-Lex. Now, this is, Melissa made me think of this. T-Lex stands for try, 3 morphemes, think, a saurus lizard, dragon. So that we're using morpheme knowledge, try, thinkosaurus, lex, meaning word. But then we just call it T-Lex. But we use that not just for morphology purposes, but very importantly to teach 3 deep reading processes. think ahead, prediction. So all the kind of prediction strategies one uses. Think back after you read the story. And here's where we're really going into background knowledge. We're going into what plot, setting, all these sorts of things. But then that middle head is think for yourself. And so what we're doing is we're connecting empathy and critical analysis to the ultimate think for yourself. What do you think? What are your insights? What does this make you imagine, connect? So it's a really important metacognitive strategy, but it's visual. It connects to their knowledge about T-Rex, and it just makes learning how to think about stories more fun. And so Ravo is really about science, and back to, if you will, the possum is our science, basically. These connected together increase fluency. So what we really want people to realize is that your advanced understanding, your expanded foundational skills all contribute to decoding a word faster, more accurately, with more meaning and understanding of how that word works. And part of that is also an unknown, it was an unknown gift when we did the first Ravo, without knowing that I was as much a psycholinguist teaching how English works as I was a cognitive neuroscientist. So this really helps English language learners learn English better. And that's why it was really important to us to have this kind of knowledge about English for our students. Now, I'm going to end this part of Ravo. The Ada are terrific. You know, this is, we know. Now, and I want you to know these are two different, what I call Ravo and my colleague Maureen Lovett's program, we call them multi-component interventions because they go after different components. And whether it's Maureen's program or my program, and she does work that we go from first grade to fourth grade, a little beyond for super struggling readers, but she goes all the way into adolescents and adults. And it's just a wonderful way. We do, I would say, we did two versions of multi-component. Ours is Possum, and hers might well be called Palm, because she doesn't do semantics and syntax the way we do. Or she does, those aren't her emphasis, but we're Possum, she's Palm. I hope she, forgive me, Maureen. Because they do a lot of story work too. But anyway, these are all leading us to an understanding from our data that
Wow.
the sooner the better, you know, do it. Now I'm going to end this actually by giving you, here's the modules that I want you to have.
Okay.
So we have all of these modules. We're finishing effective instruction this month. But the next one, this is our QR code. And we want people to have that QR code for the modules.
Okay, great. Got it.
And then this one is just, if they want to know more about Ravo, you can come to my booth at Plain Talk. Darn it. Just like how I met you at the IDA booth. That was so nice. That was really
That was
terrific.
really nice. That was
So
really nice.
I'll put that away. And so basically we are almost exactly at an hour.
Yeah.
But I want all of you to know that it's podcasts, the dissemination of this kind of knowledge that ultimately, drop by drop on the rock, will change our teaching and change our attitudes towards dyslexia. So I thank you both. I would love a link. We'll put it on our website and give it to people.
Oh, thank you.
because we would like to have, different things. We had one for classroom dynamics for New York, and again, all of these are in the spirit of how can we reach more and more teachers?
Mhm.
Yep.
So please be sure to know I am grateful for your work.
Oh, gosh, we are endlessly grateful for you and
Yes,
yours.
for sure.
Oh, my
Thank you so
goodness.
much.
Thank you
Okay,
so
and tell
much.
Dora Lynn Martin that I say hello.
And
She
she's
is
going to be
your
so
neighbor.
embarrassed that you said that.
Oh, no, we want to have part of this. I want to thank Dora Lynn. She's one of those teachers who never stops teaching, and now she's helping us with Ravo. So all of us, wherever we are, have something to give. And so Dora Lynn is one of my examples of you never stop giving to your children, your students.
Mhm. She is, and I think our audience didn't hear us before. I've worked with Dora Lynn in a school, in 2 different school districts. And she is just one of the kindest, sweetest, smartest people without letting you know that she's the smartest person. She will
Absolutely.
just listen, and she listens with her heart when she
Yeah.
listens to you,
Yes.
and gives great feedback. She's really kind. And when she told me a long time ago, she goes, "Oh, my daughter's dating Dr. Wolf's son," and I go, "What?" And I said, "Wait, what?" Because I focused back in on it. I go, "Wait, what? Huh? Dr. Wolf, like the one we know, Dr. Wolf?" And she goes, "Yeah." I was like, "You are burying the lead here." And then they get married. And I was like, "Wait."
They are. And now, and if you had seen that IDA booth at one point, there was my son, who's now
Yeah.
the director of Needle Learning that houses it. His wife, Shay, who's like unbelievably smart and has all these strategies, and her mother. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. And then Amy Ellison, who is one of the finest
Yeah.
Raven teachers, who's co-writing with me. So
Wow.
what we have is a family operation, which we never thought we would have. It's
is
really,
so
that's a
awesome.
fun way to end my time with you,
Yes.
Amy and Melissa.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
You've been a
We are
gift.
a family. We are a family. That's really what it amounts to. When we are teachers, we are a family of teachers of all students, wherever they are.
Exactly right. That's
So,
exactly right.
okay, take
Thank
care
you.
now.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Recording. So, hey, Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So, your voice sounds great. I like it. Is this a new
It's
thing?
not as sexy as it normally is.
It. I like it. My kids always
Yeah.
used to tell me I sounded like Marge Simpson when I would go hoarse. So I was like, "Oh, Harmy, homie, I can't do it." I can't do it with my normal voice, and that really sounded stupid. But
Well, I wound up with laryngitis yesterday and I texted you and said in all caps, I have laryngitis
and
because I knew that we had this important interview today.
and
And
on my side, I go, "Oh, heck no!" And I did not use the word heck. And I was like, "What are we gonna do? We can't reschedule this because this was a big one, y'all." Do you know who we interviewed today?
unbelievably, we had
Unbelievable.
Dr. Maryanne Wolf.
Maryanne Wolf was on our podcast today, and we were just floored. She is so sweet and so kind and so knowledgeable. And I know we say that about everybody, but she's knowledgeable in a way that doesn't make you feel dumb. It
Oh,
makes you
yeah.
feel like, and I think she's actually going to take some of what Melissa said and incorporate it into lectures now, which I was like, oh, man.
I was floored. So you guys have to listen to that part. Let's
Yeah,
see.
yeah. So if you have been living under a rock and you don't know who Maryanne Wolf is, sorry, I'm not being insulting, but she's kind of been out there for a long time. She's a scholar, teacher, and advocate for children and literacy around the world. And she's the director of the newly created Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. She is also the author of Proust and Squid. I used to say Proust until I realized it was French. So it's Proust and the Squid, the story of science and the reading brain, dyslexia, fluency in the brain, tales of literacy for the 21st century, and Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World. And we addressed all of these aspects with her. It was a great interview.
I was kind of surprised to learn that she was a teacher turned cognitive neuroscience. Like, who does that?
Right. Who does
But
that? Not me.
Maryanne Wolf.
Right. Right. So my story, and y'all heard, if you're listening to the podcast, you hear it at the very end. When I was still teaching therapy in one of the local districts, on my dyslexia team was a teacher named Dora Lynn. And Dora Lynn was just so sweet. And she was really working because she loves therapy. She didn't have to work. She just loved providing therapy for students with dyslexia. And so we got to be buddies, and she was just so sweet and kind and wonderful. And then when I changed districts, she eventually ended up in the other district I was in. And I remember I don't know if we were at a meeting or if we were out to lunch or something. And she goes, "Oh, my daughter's dating Dr. Wolf's," I think she said Maryanne Wolf's son. And I go, "What?" Wait a minute. You waited? She waited like 15, 20 minutes. I was like, you're burying the lead here. What? Like the Maryanne Wolf? Are you serious? She goes, "Yeah." And I was like, "What?" And so a few years later, I ran into her again because we weren't working in the same district. And she goes, "Oh, my daughter got married to Maryanne Wolf's son." I was like, "What?" So now you're related? Now you're related? And when Melissa and I were at IDA for the dyslexia duo, Dr. Wolf was there with Dora Lynn, and I ran into Dora Lynn. She goes, "Oh, I'm working for Maryanne now." I go, "What? You're calling her by her first name?" So yeah, so we got to walk up and introduce ourselves, and Dr. Wolf said, "Any friend of Dora Lynn's is a friend of ours." So I guess we can go over and eat supper sometime,
I
if we're,
guess, and
if we're out that way.
maybe we could be on a first name basis too.
I don't know. I can't do that. I can't do that. She's going to be Dr. Wolf because that's that level of respect, right?
Okay.
So, okay. But I hope y'all enjoyed this podcast. It was really a lot of fun to record. So this is Amy.
And Melissa.
And we're signing off so you can listen to the podcast. Thanks, guys. Bye. Trying to pause.